Welcome back to my channel Celeb Buzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates.
He was supposed to change the world. But on a cold December night in 1980, the world changed him forever. John Lennon, a name etched into the soul of music, rebellion, peace, and tragedy. He was a Beatle, a dreamer, a lover, a fighter, and a man who never stopped trying to find meaning in a world that rarely made sense. But behind the round glasses and the soft smile hid a darker story, one the world never fully understood. Until now, because something has finally surfaced, and it isn't good. For decades, we've asked the same questions. Why him? Why then? Why that way? The man who once sang, "All you need is love," was gunned down outside his home, not by an enemy but by a fan. Or so we were told. The killer, Mark David Chapman, claimed he did it because Lennon was a phony, because he had become what he once stood against. But that answer never truly satisfied. It never explained the contradictions, the timing, the strange coincidences, the chilling behavior. And it never explained what John had felt in the weeks before his death. He was uneasy, restless, as if he knew something was coming. Friends said he was finally at peace, happy, even back in the studio, making music again after 5 long years away. But others saw something different. John had begun to speak about death, about the afterlife, about starting over, almost as if he was preparing. In his final interview, given just hours before he was killed, he said, "I consider that my work won't be finished until I'm dead and buried, and I hope that's a long, long time from now." He would be dead 6 hours later. Coincidence? Or something darker? What if we've misunderstood this story for 45 years? Because recently uncovered details paint a far more disturbing picture, not just of John Lennon's death, but the forces that may have orchestrated it. Not a lone madman, but a system, a hidden machine that saw Lennon as a threat, not because of his music, but because of his voice. You see, John had power, the kind that frightened governments. During the Vietnam War, he called out U.S. leaders, challenged politicians, and organized mass protests, all with a guitar and a microphone. The FBI, they watched him, wiretapped him, followed him. He was under constant surveillance. He once said, "You don't get chased by the FBI unless you're dangerous." And I was dangerous to them. He wanted peace. But in a world built on control, peace can be threatening. In declassified documents, Lennon's name appears over and over again. He was labeled a political radical, a potential disruptor, even a subversive. They tried to deport him. They failed. But did they stop watching? That's the part nobody could prove. Until now. In 2023, a whistleblower released a batch of memos, buried for decades, suggesting that John Lennon was more than just monitored. He was targeted, labeled as a public influencer capable of mass disruption in upcoming electoral cycles. The memo suggested strategic mitigation. That's code. And it doesn't mean putting a man in jail. It means silencing him. Permanently. Of course, no direct order exists. Nothing signed. Nothing traceable. But the pattern, the timing, the language, it's all there. And then there's him, Mark David Chapman. He wasn't just a fan gone mad. He had traveled halfway across the country, camped outside Lennon's apartment for 3 days, got his autograph, smiled, waited, and then, just hours after Lennon's radio interview, pulled the trigger. But here's what's chilling. Chapman had no escape plan. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there, reading The Catcher in the Rye, as if he had done what he came to do, and nothing else mattered. There were no screams, no running, no attempt to flee the scene. He just stood there, motionless, silent, almost serene. Mark David Chapman didn't try to escape, didn't drop the weapon, didn't cry, didn't speak. He simply pulled out a well-worn copy of The Catcher in the Rye, sat on the curb, and began to read, like a man who had crossed a line long ago, and accepted everything that came after. He claimed the book told him to kill Lennon, that he heard voices, that he felt hollow, invisible, and killing a legend would make him feel real. He said he did it for attention, to be remembered, to be seen. But something about his story never felt complete. Something didn't sit right. The media painted him as a crazed fan, a lone lunatic, a mentally disturbed drifter obsessed with fame. But when the psychiatrists interviewed him, they saw something different. He wasn't foaming at the mouth, wasn't rambling, wasn't erratic. He was calm, too calm, measured, precise, unnaturally composed for someone who had just murdered one of the most beloved men on earth. And that calmness, it raised questions, uncomfortable ones. Was he truly insane? Or had he been prepared? Because what if this wasn't the act of a madman, but something deeper, darker, something orchestrated? The phrase came up again and again in post-investigation memos. Mind control. Sounds like a conspiracy, doesn't it? But this isn't science fiction. It's historical record. In the 1950s, the CIA launched a real and now declassified program called MKUltra. Its mission? To develop psychological manipulation techniques, to control human behavior, hypnosis, drugs, isolation, trauma, and it worked to some extent. Some of the experiments succeeded. People were rewired, made to forget, made to obey. Now consider this. Mark David Chapman had no prior violent history, no serious criminal record, no diagnosed psychosis, but he had traveled alone, trained with a firearm, studied Lennon's movements, and in the days before the murder, he acted like a man on a mission. He asked a photographer to take a picture of him with John Lennon just hours before the killing. He called his wife, told her he felt compelled to do something, and then he waited 3 full days outside the Dakota, watching, listening, preparing. He was a man in crisis. He was a man in ritual. That's what makes this story so haunting. Not just that John Lennon was killed, but that we've never really asked why. We accepted the easy answer. Fanatic, fame seeker, lunatic. But what if he wasn't? What if Chapman was just a trigger, and not the motive? Because if you look closer, much closer, the bigger picture begins to blur. John Lennon wasn't just a musician. He was a movement. He didn't only write songs. He wrote messages, protest anthems, love letters to peace, warnings about war, greed, control. He stood on stages and called out governments. He marched in protests. He made enemies in high places. In the early 70s, President Nixon personally pushed for his deportation. Why? Because Lennon planned to hold a concert that could have influenced the youth vote. Because he had a voice that people actually listened to. Imagine the power of that. A man who could strum a guitar and shake a government. And when power feels threatened, it reacts. Documents declassified by the FBI reveal surveillance operations tracking Lennon for years. Wiretaps, tailings, dossiers. And then, suddenly, the pressure stopped. He got to stay in the U.S. He stepped back from activism. He focused on family, on being a father, but not forever. Because in 1980, after 5 years away from music, he came back with a new album, new words, new energy. He was ready to speak again, louder than ever before. And 6 weeks later, he was dead. It's almost poetic if it weren't so cruel. So now ask yourself, was it coincidence or consequence? Was it madness or method? Did Mark David Chapman act alone? Or did someone want John Lennon silenced? Without fingerprints? The final mystery of John Lennon may not be who pulled the trigger, but why he had to die. That's the question we still can't shake. Not after 4 decades. Not after the memorials, the books, the documentaries. Not after all the tears and the silence. Why him? Was it the price of fame? The cost of becoming too big, too beloved, too untouchable? Or was it something more? Was it the price of truth? Of saying things that weren't supposed to be said, not from a stage, not into a microphone, not with millions listening? Or was it something even harder to face? The price of simply being heard. In a world that doesn't like to listen, because some voices don't echo. Some voices disrupt. And when they do, the world doesn't always embrace them. Sometimes it erases them. The deeper you look, the more questions you find. And the more you realize, this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a statement. Because Lennon didn't die in a war zone. He didn't fall on a battlefield. He wasn't in some distant place, fighting someone else's war. He died in New York City, right outside his own home, on a quiet sidewalk, under Christmas lights. He had just left the studio, finished recording, a cassette of his latest song still warm in his pocket. He was singing again, creating again, smiling again. He was ready again, ready to live, to speak, to challenge, but someone somewhere decided he shouldn't. And maybe that's the part we've never truly recovered from. Because this wasn't just a robbery. It wasn't random violence. It was targeted, specific, final, a message written in blood, delivered in 5 shots. And the world? It felt colder after that. The Beatles were over. But John Lennon was just beginning again. He had found his voice again. And then it was taken. That's what hurts the most. Not just that he died, but that he died at the very moment he was ready to come back to life. We didn't just lose a musician that night. We lost a voice, a dream, a living, breathing idea, an idea that the world could be better, kinder, more honest, a world without borders, without war, without fear, a world where love wasn't just a word on an album cover, but a way of life. John Lennon wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. He could be sharp, contradictory, complicated, but he was also real. He wore his heart on his sleeve, even when it bled. He asked questions no one wanted to answer, and he dared to imagine a world that didn't rely on power, profit, or politics to function. He imagined peace, and millions listened. And maybe that's what scared them the most, because truth, real truth, is dangerous. It doesn't march in with tanks or weapons. It creeps in through songs, through poetry, through art. It speaks in quiet moments, in lyrics, in love letters to the world. Truth is the most peaceful rebellion, but also the most powerful. And John Lennon? He refused to be silent, even when it was easier, even when it was safer, even when the spotlight turned into a crosshair. He spoke, and sang, and dreamed out loud. And because of that, somewhere, someone decided he had to be stopped. We may never know their name. We may never see the face behind the curtain. But the result remains. He is gone, and the world is quieter without him. So if you're still here, still listening, thank you. Because this isn't just a story about death. It's a story about memory, about truth, about how we choose to remember the voices that tried to change the world. Thank you for not turning away, for sitting with the discomfort, for honoring the questions that still echo through time. Thank you for being part of the conversation the world tried to forget, because when we ignore the truth tellers, we don't just lose them, we lose ourselves. Their words fade, their warnings vanish, their dreams die quietly, and when we stop asking why, we stop demanding better. We stop imagining. We stop hoping. We stop believing that a better world is even possible. And isn't that what John feared most? That we'd give up, settle, accept, that we'd stop imagining. He once said, reality leaves a lot to the imagination. And maybe that's why they feared him. Because he reminded us that we have power to change, to speak, to question, and most of all, to dream. So don't let this story die here. Don't let the silence win. If this touched you, even just a little, share it. Let others hear. Let others remember, like this video. Subscribe to Celeb Buzz for more untold truths. And most importantly, tell us what you believe in the comments. Do you believe John Lennon was just a victim of random violence? Or something more? Let's talk. Let's question. Let's imagine together. Because the moment we stop imagining is the moment the dream truly dies. And John Lennon? He never stopped dreaming. Let's not stop either.